Hello, friends. Welcome back to Indistinct Chatter. I'm Eliza, and for today's episode, I'm going to need every horse girl to unite because our horses are in danger. Giddy up. We are literally in the year of the fire horse, and fire horse energy brings passion, drive, vitality, boldness. It's supposed to be a year of revolutionary spirit and authenticity, but what's happening to America's wild horses right now is certainly not fitting the bill. I've been seeing headlines about our wild horses over socials for the past week or so, and let me just read you a few of what I have seen. From NPR, federal government thins the herds of wild horses in Colorado. From people.com, 3,700 wild horses sold in first year of Trump's second term raises fears some are being sent to slaughter. And then from the New York Times, under Trump, protected wild horses are going to slaughter. Now that New York Times one, that's the big one. They're the ones who went into investigation mode that led to all of the other headlines. They followed the money, the horses, the paper trail, all that good stuff. I'll come back to that in a second because there's more to that story than the headline tells you. But first, let's do a little history lesson about our wild horses because up until recently, I didn't really think much into it. They've always just been there and that was kind of that. But I learned something new, so I wanted to share it with you. First, I don't remember where I heard this or if I learned it or if it was just what people were saying, but I was always under the impression that our horses came from Europe. Well, guess what? Horses actually did originate from North America. They're not exactly the horses we have now, but I mean, technically, they're from here. Over 50 million years ago, during the Eocene epoch, a small multi-toed forest animal evolved right here on this continent. The creature looked nothing like the horses we know today, though. Instead, think of like a whippet, those fast little skinny dogs, or maybe just imagine a fox or just a fox-sized animal. They stood roughly 10 to 18 inches at the shoulder, roughly around a foot tall, just cutie little cuties. Not exactly a stallion, right? But they're cute. And then over millions of years, these horses adapted. As their world changed from thick forests to open grasslands, their bodies shifted to fit new challenges. Their teeth evolved, their limbs got longer, they went from having 4 toes to just needing 1, and eventually we get the modern horse. Equus caballus. It all started here, right here in North America. And then these little cuties, they started crossing the Bering Land Bridge into Asia and Europe, and they were spreading there. And then sadly, around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, all of the North American horses went completely extinct. Climate shifts, human hunting, the end of the Ice Age, whatever the exact cause, the horses that thrived here for millions of years suddenly disappeared. And for thousands of years after that, there were no horses in North America. Then, in 1493, on his second venture to the Americas, Christopher Columbus brought horses with him. These weren't wild horses, though. These were Spanish horses, Iberian breeds, tough and adaptable animals brought specifically for conquest and labor. By 1519, when Hernán Cortés arrived in Mexico with his conquistadors, horses became a weapon of war. The Aztecs had never seen anything like them. Cortés himself said, next to God, we owed our victory to the horses. And I mean, think about it. Imagine seeing a horse for the first time. You've never seen anything like that. That's terrifying. And it's not like back then they had fun little videos of them driving trucks or sitting at the kitchen table drinking a coffee. You know what I'm saying? These are huge, giant, crazy animals that they've never even heard of, let alone seen. Don't act like you wouldn't be at least a little freaked out by them. The Spanish used horses for dominance, for transportation, for power, and by 1525, Cortés had imported enough horses that Mexico had an established horse breeding population. The numbers grew fast. Boy, did they grow fast. There were at least 10,000 free roaming horses in Mexico by 1553, just 28 years. Then it kept going. When Juan de Oñate founded Santa Fe de Nueve Mexico in 1598, he arrived with 75 horses in his original expedition. He expanded his herd to 800. And then again, from there, the horse population increased even more. By the time you get to the 1680 Pueblo Revolt, rebels under Pape seized roughly 1,500 horses abandoned by fleeing Spaniards, which Pueblos then bred and traded northward via ancient routes, ending Spain's equine monopoly, and enabling tribes like the Comanche and Shoshone to develop nomadic horse cultures. So, with that being said, as Spanish colonizers pushed farther into North America, some horses escaped. Some were abandoned, some were traded, some were stolen, and the Native American groups who got their hands on these horses, the Apache, the Comanche, the Utes, the Shoshone, they recognized the value of these horses immediately. They integrated horses into their cultures and their trade networks, like real quick. Within just a few generations, horses had spread across the Great Plains and Rocky Mountains. The horses that weren't captured, the ones that ran free on the open range, they formed their own herds. Those are the ones we call Mustangs today. So, when you're looking at a wild horse in the American West, you are in fact looking at a descendant of Spanish colonial horses. They're technically feral horses. They're not truly wild animals. But I mean, they've been roaming free for like 500 years. So in my opinion, that's long enough to, one, be considered wild, and two, I would say that's long enough to say that they belong here. By the 1950s, the wild horse population had been decimated from millions to fewer than 20,000. But those remaining horses still roamed public lands freely as symbols of the American West, or at least they were supposed to be. But things got dark. Horses weren't as necessary for labor anymore. By this point, cars existed, mechanized farming existed. So what happened to all these wild horses? Can you guess? People hunted them. And I mean brutally. They used airplanes, trucks, they poisoned water holes. They rounded them up and sold them for pet food and fertilizer. There are old ads from the 1920s encouraging tourists to travel to the West to shoot horses for sport. By the time we got to the 1950s, the wild horse population that had been thriving for centuries was being systematically decimated. Millions of Mustangs were killed or sent to slaughter. And honestly, it seemed like nobody in power really cared. But someone cared. And her name was Velma Johnston. She was born in Reno, Nevada on March 5th, 1912. She's a Pisces. They're known for their strong intuition, sharp minds, and their deep empathy. And honestly, I think that fits very well for Velma. When Velma was just 11 years old, she contracted polio. She was confined to a cast for 6 months, and the cast left her body deformed. And I say that with air quotes because I feel like that's such a shitty term, but that's the term that was used in my research. So, whatever. And throughout her childhood, kids picked on her and they bullied her for her looks. Bullies, I tell you, no matter the decade, they're all the same. So Velma grew up on a ranch and she loved horses. She rode her father's gentled Mustangs, and during her recovery from polio, she spent a lot of time in bed reading about horses. And therefore, they kind of just like helped her get better. So while other kids were taunting her, she was bonding with animals who, honestly, animals don't care what you look like. They just saw Velma, And it was that experience, being ostracized, being treated as different, that taught her something very important. She learned to have empathy for things that didn't quite fit into what people wanted. She understood what it meant to be seen as disposable or unwanted. Later down the line, as an adult, she married a rancher named Charles Johnston. They ran a dude ranch together on the Truckee River near Wadsworth, Nevada, and she also worked as a secretary in Reno. Velma, she's a busy girl. Now, Charlie and Velma couldn't have children of their own on account of the polio, so they opened their ranch to kids and started programs that brought young people to experience horses. And this is important because it kind of shaped everything that came next. Velma had spent her entire life understanding what it meant to be treated as an outsider. Like I said, she was so bullied. And so she had this gift for connecting with people. I mean, if you look her up, you'll see it. Like just looking at photos of her, she looks so friendly. She looks so welcoming. She looks like somebody you know. She has kind eyes. She gives trustworthy vibes. Like, I personally don't understand the bullying because all I see in these photos are a woman who cares deeply. And I don't think she looks disfigured in any way. Like, I don't understand what a lot of these articles were saying, but whatever. People's egos back then, I guess. I don't know. They all thought they were models, whatever. I think she's a lovely woman. I'm moving on. Then one ordinary morning in 1950, Velma's gift of empathy and understanding what it meant to be treated as an outsider was about to change her life. And not just her own life, a lot of lives. So, as Velma left her ranch to drive to work outside Reno, she saw something that, quite honestly, just chilled her to her bones. There was blood dripping out of a horse trailer, and not just like a little bit, but enough that she noticed and enough that it caught her eyes. The trailer pulled in front of her on the road. It was enough blood that she was horrified by it. And she was so horrified that her first instinct was to warn the driver. Maybe he didn't know his cargo was damaged. Maybe the animals were injured or suffering. So she followed the trailer. And wouldn't you know, it pulls into a slaughterhouse on the Nevada-California border. When Velma looked inside, she found a trio of terrified, badly injured wild horses crammed in together in this tiny little trailer. They were brutally captured. They were mangled. One young colt was even being trampled to death by the others amongst all the panic and like the confined space. It was devastating. These horses were not heading to safety. They were heading to be killed and turned into dog food. That's right. Horses were dog food. And I mentioned that there was an ad back in the day encouraging tourists to travel west to shoot horses for sport. This was a 1920 tourism ad in Popular Mechanics. And then in 1922, Kennel Ration, an old canned dog food company, started using wild horse meat for its dog food because it was abundant and considered low value. During the next 2 decades, nearly 2 million Mustangs went to slaughterhouses where their meat became dog chow and their hides were used for making baseballs. So by the 1950s, you have this established market. Mustangers, or bounty hunters, would round up wild horses and sell them to slaughterhouses. The meat went to pet food companies. The hides went to manufacturers. It was profitable. It was normalized. And it was happening to thousands of horses every year. So in that moment, that single encounter with a truck full of bleeding horses, Velma decided she was going to stop this, not just for those 3 horses, but for every wild horse in America. So let me walk you through those next 27 years. That's right. She worked hard for 27 years. Velma did what is honestly best in my opinion. She started where she was. She started locally. She and Charlie began a kitchen campaign. They wrote letters at home. They reached out to schools and asked if teachers would have their students write to Congress. She became a public speaker and she was quite good at it. She was charming, but still very commanding. She went to community meetings in Virginia City and Story County, and she talked about what was happening to wild horses. Like, she was all in. In 1952, after 3 years of organizing, she earned her nickname. Government officials and ranchers started calling her Wild Horse Annie. Only they were doing it as an insult. Our girl Velma, she didn't let the bastards keep her down. Instead, she adopted the nickname. And honestly, I think it's a great name. I've been called much worse. Over time, she escalated her strategy. And in 1955, after years of organizing, the Nevada legislature passed a bill that made it illegal to kill, harass, or molest, meaning to interfere with or harm, wild animals from aircraft on state lands. You would get slapped with a $500 fine or 6 months in jail if you violated it. So, all right, whoop, whoop, we've got ourselves a win. Yay! End of story, right? Of course not. Velma knew it wasn't enough. Most of Nevada fell under federal control, not state control. She needed Congress to act. So she pitched her testimony to major publications. She told them what she'd witnessed, the brutal roundups, the slaughter, the fact that wild horses were being systematically destroyed. Reader's Digest published it. The Denver Post published it. Millions of Americans were reading about what was happening to our wild horses. But she didn't stop there. She did something kind of quite genius. She asked schools across the entire country to participate in a massive letter writing campaign to Congress. She called them her Pencil Brigade, which is just so cool. It's so cute. These are school children, and they're writing letters demanding that Congress protect wild horses. Now, it might not be like this today, but children used to matter. So when you've got a lot of kids writing, well, demanding you protect wild horses, you know it's going to get some attention. More than any other person, Velma made the Mustang resonate with people, with readers of the Sunday paper, with congressmen on the way home to their districts, with children in writing class in school. The Associated Press reported in 1959, seldom has an issue touched such a responsive chord. Then, on September 8th, 1959, President Eisenhower signed the Wild Horse Annie Act into law. It banned the use of motorized vehicles, like planes, trucks, helicopters, from capturing wild horses and burros on public lands. And burros, if you aren't aware, those are the small, hardy wild donkeys. They're kind of roped in with the wild horses. They are, in fact, their own thing, but it's kind of like a 2-for-1 here, okay? Anyway, so it also banned poisoning water holes. So 9 years after that morning in 1950, Velma did it. She changed the federal law. End of story now, right? Right? No, Velma's heart broke again. Ranchers figured out ways around the law. They mingled their own horses with wild horses and claimed them all as their own. They set traps that drew wild horses in under the cover of the night, real shady shit. And they did this because there was an exception left in the first federal law, the one that allowed for humane kills when populations grew too large. And that exception became a loophole. So wild horse captures resumed. Velma realized the 1959 law wasn't strong enough. She needed federal protection with no room for workarounds. So back to it she went. The next 12 years were brutal. She went out onto the range with her husband, Charlie, documenting what was happening to wild horses in real time. She testified before Congress. She continued her letter writing campaigns. She faced opposition from powerful ranchers and politicians who wanted to keep doing what they'd always been doing. People love to do that. They love to say, well, this is just the way it's always been. And of course, they acted like her childhood bullies and they mocked her looks the entire time. But she didn't stop. She kept fighting. And then on December 15th, 1971, President Richard Nixon signed the Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act. Congress passed it unanimously, not one single dissenting vote. Wah, 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 wah. Hell yeah. This law declared that wild horses and burros are living symbols of the historic and pioneer spirit of the West, and it mandated that they be protected as an integral part of the natural system of the public lands. It created a framework for human management, like adoption programs, birth control via fertility vaccines, and roundups only when necessary to prevent starvation or land degradation. Velma Johnston, a girl who was bullied for how she looked, who bonded with horses instead of people, who started a kitchen campaign with her husband and mobilized school children across America, she freaking did it. She had done it not through political connections or money or power. She did it through persistence, through organizing ordinary people, and by refusing to give up when people dismissed her cause. She's pretty inspirational, if you ask me. And she lived to see the 1971 Act pass, and she got to see her life's work become law. But on June 27, 1977, just 6 years after her greatest victory, Velma sadly lost her battle with cancer and passed away at just 65 years old. I mean, it's always the good ones. So, what does the law actually do, though? Well, here is what the 1971 Act created. It made it illegal for anyone to harass, brand, capture, or kill wild horses or burros on federal public lands. It declared them protected animals. It directed the Bureau of Land Management, or the BLM, to manage herd populations to maintain ecological balance, like making sure the animals don't starve and the land doesn't degrade, while also sharing space with wildlife and livestock. The original intent was pretty clear, if you ask me. These animals are ours. They're part of our heritage. We protect them. And I mentioned management a little bit ago. So just like with other wildlife, if an animal doesn't have enough predators, we kind of, we step in to manage population in order to prevent starvation, diseases, overeating of food that other animals also need, all that stuff. So management methods include roundups, which use helicopters to gather horses from overpopulated ranges, birth control via fertility vaccines to slow population growth. And they do this a lot of times with they'll shoot darts. And then adoption programs where captured horses can be placed into private care. Right now, there are roughly 73,000 wild horses roaming on federal public lands. The BLM is supposed to manage them. It's supposed to protect them. That's the law. That's what Velma fought for. But let's talk about what's actually happening. So in the span of just 19 months, from early 2025 through August 2026, the BLM sold 6,331 wild horses. If you know nothing about this whole situation, that number means nothing to you, but that's a lot. Some might even say unprecedented. That's not even just how many they've captured, that's just how many they've sold. And just to put it into perspective, so you know why selling 6,331 wild horses is kind of alarming, the agency's historic average is about 1,200 horses per year. So we're talking about selling more than 5 times that number in less than 2 years. And it gets worse. Of those 6,331 horses, 55.4% were aged 1 to 4 years old. These are the most highly adoptable prime age horses in the system. Healthy young horses that should have their whole lives ahead of them. So why the sudden spike? The government captures an average of about 9,500 wild horses per year. They find adopters for roughly half of them, and the rest of them end up in long-term holding facilities. And the cost of that is astronomical. Plus, there are arguments on both sides of the fence about these long-term holding facilities. One argument is that these horses never have to go hungry, so that's good. But the other is that these are basically prisons for horses that are meant to be wild. Right now, approximately 58,000 wild horses are in government holding. They're in feedlots and pastures. Now, that's a lot of horses. The cost to warehouse these horses is about $100 million per year. That is consuming most of the BLM's $142 million budget for the entire wild horse and burro program. So, the agency that is supposed to protect wild horses is spending $100 million annually to keep them alive while they're held in captivity with $42 million left over for everything else, which might sound like a lot, but in government, it's not really that much. And that's kind of the whole situation the BLM found itself in at the beginning of 2025. Now, you may or may not know, math is like a foreign language to me, a foreign language that I don't really know. But here we go anyway. All right, let's break some things down real quick. So the government spends more than $3,000 to capture a Mustang and bring it to market. But they sell each one for as little as $25. Now, I'm not a money girl, but it's not really a great return. Meanwhile, a horse can get you up to $750 at a slaughter plant in Canada. You can do the math, right? Someone buys a horse for $25, ships it across the border, and sells it for $750. That's quite the profit. It's quite an incentive. However, the BLM has a program called the Sale Authority Program. It allows the agency to sell horses to buyers outside of the standard adoption process. The idea was to get horses into private hands without spending $1,000 per horse on adoption incentives. But what the BLM didn't do, or what it deliberately ignored, was adequately verifying where those horses were actually going. In March 2025, a federal court ended one of the BLM's main programs, the Adoption Incentive Program that paid adopters $1,000 per horse. So now suddenly the BLM needed to move horses out of government holding, and they needed to move them fast. A few weeks later, an Ohio livestock trader named Brandon Jones had his application to the BLM approved. Jones was approved to buy nearly 500 wild horses. And guess what? Here's what you need to know about Brandon Jones. He had no established connection to the wild horse world. He had no history of working with Mustangs, and his application sat in bureaucratic limbo for a year before suddenly being expedited after that court ruling, the one that ended the BLM's adoption incentive program, the one that paid adopters $1,000 per horse to take wild horses, the one that made it so the BLM needed to move horses out of holding and move them out fast. That one. And get this. The veterinarian he listed on his application worked at a practice just an hour away from his land. Sounds good, right? But the ding, ding, ding here, the red flag, is that the practice's website says it treated only small animals. Last I checked, horses weren't really small animals. And if that's not sketchy enough, 2 months before his application was approved, Jones had been cited for violating the Federal Packers and Stockyards Act. The Federal Packers and Stockyards Act is a federal law governing livestock handling. He violated it by failing to pay on time for livestock purchases. He failed to keep records. And he issued bad checks. Basically, financial irresponsibility and non-compliance with livestock handling regulations. But the BLM approved him anyway. They needed to move those horses. Then the New York Times, working with advocacy groups like American Wild Horse Conservation and Skydog Sanctuary, tracked what happened to horses sold to Brandon Jones. These horses were purchased from the BLM for $25 each. They were shipped to Jones Corral. Then, according to the Times reporting, a day later, 2 double-decker cattle trucks pulled up at midnight, loaded the Mustangs, and quickly drove off into the night. From there, the Mustangs disappeared. They were exported to Canada. The United States had banned horse slaughter back in 2007, but here's the loophole. Horses don't need to be slaughtered in America if they can be shipped across the border. And according to livestock inspection records, Mustangs sold by the government were sent to slaughterhouses in Canada. They're leaving the country on midnight cattle trucks, and they're not coming back. Investigators tracked 333 wild horses in burrows and kill pens, and they found instances where horses were flipped or resold to slaughter buyers just days after being purchased from the government. They filed 8 formal complaints with the BLM. So, about that evidence, consider it documented. The BLM publicly denies that it's funneling horses to slaughter, but the New York Times has the evidence. The midnight cattle trucks, the Canadian slaughterhouses, the inspection records. The BLM is saying one thing to the public while doing the exact opposite behind closed doors. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, okay, but what about the 1971 law? What about everything Velma worked for? Well, I had the same thought. This violates every intention of the 1971 Act. Congress passed that law saying these horses are living symbols of the historic and pioneer spirit of the West. These horses should be protected. Instead, they're being sold on the cheap to anyone willing to buy them with no verification of where they're going. Velma Johnston fought for 27 years to make sure this didn't happen, and now it's happening. And now maybe you're like me and you're starting to spiral a bit. Where is this horse meat going? Why is this a thing? Well, all we know for certain is that these horses were sold by our government and then they were shipped off to Canada to be slaughtered. That's kind of all we know for certain. However, there is a lot of chatter, a lot of speculation, and this part is all alleged, but I think it's worth exploring. Some people are saying Trump orchestrated this specifically to solve a beef crisis. Others say he's doing it to appease the livestock lobby. Now, here's what we know to be true. First, yes, there is a beef crisis right now. The U.S. cattle herd is at a 75-year low, 86.2 million head, down from 94.7 million in 2019. And I hate that I just said head. It reminds me of that damn book where humans were called head. Anyway, ground beef prices hit $6.69 a pound in December of last year. That's up 72% since 2020. So this is very real, and it's driven by drought and also by a Mexican border closure due to screwworm that cut off 1.2 million head of annual cattle imports. I got to figure out something better to say than that. Head? Cows? I don't know. But I've got more math for you. Yay, we love math! Woo! The US has 86 million cattle. The BLM sold 6,331 wild horses in 2025. That's a ratio of about 13,600 cattle to every one wild horse. Horse meat would be completely negligible to a beef crisis. It wouldn't really move the needle, at all. So while there is a beef crisis, using it as justification for the wild horse sales doesn't really make sense. It's more likely the livestock lobby is using the crisis as political cover for an agenda that they've had for years, freeing up grazing land and reducing the BLM's management costs, blah, 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 blah. And Trump's administration did propose removing the 2007 congressional prohibition against slaughter. And then the sales spike did happen under his watch. I'm not saying anything other than that's kind of interesting. The livestock industry has been lobbying for this for years. But the original problem, the $100 million annual cost of holding 58,000 horses, that's been a crisis since at least 2008, which is before Trump's current term. So, is Trump behind this? I mean, you know how I feel about the guy, but I'll be fair based on the information that I know right now. First, he did enable it, but the BLM created the loophole and the financial crisis created the incentive to exploit it. So, as far as what we know right now, that's that. Now, as investigations continue, the answer to that question of whether he's behind it or not, that might change. But moving on, why should you care? Maybe you're wondering that, especially if you don't live in the West, or maybe you don't even really like horses. I don't know. Well, there's a lot more at stake than you think. Wild horses are not just these beautiful symbols. They're not just pretty things to look at. They actually do real measurable things for our landscape and for our economy. Wild horses dig wells, literally. That's not some poetic thing. They use their hooves to access groundwater. Scientists have documented wells that go up to 6 feet deep. In arid desert environments where water is precious and scarce, these horse-dug wells sometimes provide the only available water source for miles during hot, dry summers. When researchers studied these wells, they found 57 different animal species coming to drink from them. 57. These wells aren't just survival spots for horses, they're oases that support entire ecosystems. These wells increase accessible surface water density by up to 14-fold in some areas. So imagine an area that had one water hole. Now imagine it had 14. That's an entire network of water sources where there used to be almost none. And that's what horses created just by digging with their hooves. The wells serve as nurseries for riparian trees like willows and cottonwoods. These trees germinate at the water source and establish themselves. Horses are literally reshaping the landscape, creating microhabitats and building resilience into these ecosystems. Horses also spread seeds through their manure across wide areas as they roam. They trample vegetation and they create trails that can serve as fire breaks in fire-prone regions. Scientists actually call this ecosystem engineering. So wild horses aren't just living in their environment. They're not just dilly-daddling along. They're actively improving it. They're like environmentalists that probably don't even realize it. Or maybe they do. I don't know. They're smart. And aside from that, millions of visitors travel to Western public lands specifically to see mustangs in their natural habitat. The Salt River wild horses in Arizona draw tens of thousands of visitors to the Tonto National Forest. In Utah, photographers flock to the Onaki Mountains. In Nevada, the town of Carson Valley promotes its wild mustangs as a major tourist draw. The wildlife viewing industry is worth over $65 billion nationally, and wild horse ecotourism is becoming increasingly popular. All of this equals economic value and jobs. This is revenue for small rural communities across the West, revenue that can literally make or break a small town. And here's something else worth noting. Most of the domesticated horses in America, the ones in stables, on ranches, at therapy programs, in police units, they are descendants of the same Spanish colonial stock as our wild horses. The domestic horse industry contributes over $122 billion annually to the U.S. economy and supports approximately 1.7 million full-time jobs. Horses assist in daily livestock herding and ranch operations across rural America. They are used in therapy programs for veterans with PTSD and individuals with autism, helping people improve motor skills, balance, and core strength. Mounted police units navigate dense urban crowds more effectively than they do if they were in vehicles. Search and rescue teams use horses to access rugged, roadless wilderness to find missing persons. Border security patrols use horses to reach remote, mountainous international borders that trucks and ATVs can't access. The racing industry generates billions of dollars in revenue through historic events like the Kentucky Derby, the rodeo, show jumping, and dressage industries. They're massive. Trail riding tourism, dude ranches, camping. These are entire economic sectors built on the backs of horses, literally. And speaking of trail riding tourism, want to hear a funny story? It's a cautionary tale, really. So, before I moved back to my homeland of Colorado, Cole and I were here as tourists. We stopped at a little dispo, we picked up a medicinal brownie. And at this point, I have had my experience with edibles, but I was warned that because it was medicinal, I needed to take it little by little. So, before arriving to go horseback riding, I took just a little tiny corner piece, just a little nibble, and I ate it. I thought maybe this would, elevate my experience or something. I don't know. I was an idiot. Every trail riding excursion that I had been on before was kind of automated. So that's what I thought I was getting into. The horse just follows the same trail every day and you're basically just kind of luggage. They don't really need a lot of directing. Well, this was different. So we meet our horses. I get mine. He's a little silly, but we're vibing. I am warned that he has horse ADHD or something. He gets the munchies. And so obviously hearing this, I'm amused because I'm waiting for my brownie to kick in and I'm probably going to have the munchies. So maybe 20 minutes goes by. I don't really remember anymore, but I'm not feeling anything. So I figure, maybe I didn't eat enough. But at this point, I'm honestly perfectly fine with it. Honestly, I'm a little relieved because this isn't a flat trail. And we find out that it does require a little guidance by the riders, especially my horse. He gets distracted so easily. And he gets so distracted that we are actually the first in line after the leader. So she can help me if we get stuck. Off to a great start. So we start on the trail and we're told that we're going to be going up. We're shown how to help the horse, lean forward when we're going up, don't lean back, that sort of thing. But I still assume it's just kind of this gentle hill. My horse, he gets distracted, like she said he would, a lot. He likes to stop and eat random plants along the way. For the most part, he listens to me. I'll pat him on the neck and I just kind of pull the reins a little bit and he'll get back in line and keep going on the trail. Well, then we reach the incline. And remember that nice little gentle hill I thought we were going up? Well, it was more like our horses were going to be mountain climbing and we were their backpacks. So now I'm starting to feel a little nervous, but I'm trusting my horse. I'm trusting the program and I'm trying not to let him sense my nerves, because Horses can sense your energy, all that jazz. So we get to a point where we are no longer climbing, but we're like along an edge of a very steep cliff. My horse starts eating, but this time he doesn't really want to leave his spot that he has found. Whatever he's eating is good, and he does not want to leave it. We are now holding up the line, and the other horses are getting antsy. I think Cole's horse even tried to nip at my horse. The leader, she's telling me, like, just kick him and he'll move. Well, something about me. I can't kick a horse. I know it's like okay or whatever, but to me, it's not. I just can't. One, I don't know how hard is too hard or how light is too light. So instead, I just keep whispering to him and I'm telling him, hey, we gotta go, we gotta go. It's at this point, not even halfway through our ride, that it hits me. I am super high. I can't speak. My mouth is so dry. I've never experienced dry mouth like that before or after that moment in my entire life. I also, at this point, can't even really see very well. I already have terrible vision and I'm not wearing my glasses and I'm under an influence. I do see, however, my horse's ears and they start flipping back and forth rapidly. And he's starting to feel tense under me. So now I'm thinking, oh my God, when I met him, I wasn't high, but now I am. So he doesn't recognize me anymore. And he is probably freaking out and he's going to throw me off the mountain. So I just lean forward. I whisper to him, hey, bud, it's me. You're doing great. We got to move though, okay? He's still not moving. Ears are going crazy. He's kind of huffing a little bit. So then I think, wait. Maybe he hears an animal, a mountain lion or a bear. We're about to be attacked and he is going to buck me off this cliff. Either way, I'm going down because I don't know what to do if he runs. I'm usually just luggage, remember? Now I'm realizing I can't even really hear anything because seconds later, the leader, she's off her horse and she's pulling mine back in line. After that, I don't really remember the rest of the ride other than just wishing that I had water with me. But then I do remember, shit, we got to go back down the mountain that our horses just mountain climbed up the side of. Those freaking 90-degree angle drop. We got to go down them. And I mean, obviously it wasn't 90-degree drops, but I do remember being thrown around on the back of that horse like a rag doll. And I remember he did have to jump from ledge to ledge at least once. Oof, guys, it was wild, but lesson learned about edibles, right? Wrong. I had to learn a few more times after that, but those are stories for another time. Anyway, back to horses. Horses maintain millions of acres of green space and agricultural rangeland. They are part of the infrastructure of the American West, both economically and culturally. And wild horses are part of that heritage. They are part of what makes the West feel like the West. So, if you're feeling so inclined, I have some information on ways you can help. First, you can support organizations working to help our wild horses. I have a few for you to check out. You can donate, share, subscribe, volunteer, whatever you can, whatever you feel like doing, whatever you're able to do. First one is American Wild Horse Conservation. So that's at AmericanWildHorse.org. They have been doing the investigative work that led to the New York Times expose. They track horses, they gather evidence, and they file complaints with the BLM. Then the Skydog Ranch and Sanctuary, that's at skydogranch.org. They are actively rescuing wild horses from the slaughter pipeline and providing them with long-term care. And the third one is called Return to Freedom, and you can find them at returntofreedom.org. They run adoption and sanctuary programs where wild horses can be placed with people who will actually care for them properly. So these are just 3 organizations. There are many, many more, but these are the 3 that I dug up. They are doing some very real boots on the ground work, and they need support. Then, if you're in a Western state, your senators and representatives should know how you feel about this. Congress passed the 1971 Act. They can pass amendments to close loopholes and increase oversight of the BLM's sale authority program. You can also pressure the BLM. The agency can change its practices. It can verify buyers more carefully. It can restore adoption incentive programs or find other solutions that don't involve the slaughter pipeline. Pressure them. Comment on their proposed management plans. File FOIA requests. Make your voice heard. And of course, not everyone knows what's happening. If you care about wild horses, talk about it. That's free to do. Post about it. Raise awareness. The reason the New York Times was able to expose this was because activists brought it to them. Grassroots pressure matters and it can work. Now, before I go, I wanted to recommend a couple of things that will hopefully deepen your understanding of wild horses and the people who fight for them. First, Wild Horse Annie, Friend of the Mustangs by Tracy Fern. This is a children's book, but read it anyway, or read it to your kids, or whatever kids are in your life, just read it. It tells Velma's story in a way that's accessible and also very inspiring. It shows kids that ordinary people can change the world. I feel like you can't go wrong with a story like that. Plus, it's based on a real person. Even better. Second is another book, Wild Horse Annie and the Last of the Mustangs, The Life of Velma Johnston. This is by David Cruz and Allison Griffiths. It is a comprehensive biography that follows Velma from her childhood all the way through her dangerous vigilante-style missions to document roundups, and then through the innovative grassroots campaigns that changed federal law. And if you want the full story of her life and the fights she won and lost, this is the book for you to read and learn. Lastly, a solid movie recommendation. Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron. This is a DreamWorks animated film from 2002. It's a banger. It is about a wild Mustang in the American West who refuses to be captured or tamed. It's beautiful. It's emotional. It's a great story about freedom and resilience. It's also just in general, just a really good movie. Watch it. Let it remind you why wild horses matter. And there you have it, friends. That's all I have for you today. We learned a lot. We learned that horses evolved here in North America 50 million years ago. Then they went extinct. Then they came back with Spanish conquistadors. They became iconic symbols of the American West. We learned that one very brave and passionate woman fought to protect them. Congress passed a law because of her. And now we have learned that law is being circumvented through bureaucratic loopholes and financial incentives that prioritize budget management over animal welfare. Like I mentioned at the top of the episode, we are in the year of the fire horse, a year of authenticity and revolutionary spirit. And what's happening to our wild horses? Deception, bureaucratic workarounds, government agencies publicly denying what they're doing behind closed doors. This is honestly an age-old story about systems of power. I mean, we learned how good intentions can be undermined by practical constraints. We learned about why grassroots activism and investigative journalism still matters. Honestly, without activists in the New York Times, we probably wouldn't even know what was going on with our horses right now. At least, maybe not on this level. If you're not in the horse world, you know what I'm saying? Wild horses deserve to roam free, or at the very least, they deserve to roam free on the lands that Congress designated for them. They deserve protection, not slaughter, and we deserve to know the truth about what our government is doing with our public lands and the animals that live on them. If you care about wild horses, please consider reaching out to your representatives. Support the organizations fighting to protect them. Share this episode, share Velma's story, share the history. And the next time you see a wild horse, whether it's in person or online or in a documentary, a movie, wherever, remember that it's not just a beautiful thing to look at. It is an ecosystem engineer. It's part of our heritage. And right now, it needs protection. The horses need our help. And now, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at indistinct.pod, or you can find me at Eliza Hollister. Please DM me with your thoughts, questions, topic suggestions. Please also consider rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you're listening. It means a lot. We will chat next week. Love ya. Love you. Bye.